Hi guys, my name is Oded, and in this podcast we'll speak about software development in the field of medical device, pharmaceuticals, and healthcare with industry-leading experts. I hope you find this content useful. Let's start. Hi, I'm very excited to have Dr. Kathy Walsh with us today to discuss QMS systems. Hi, Katie. Thank you for taking the time. Before we dive in, can you please tell us a bit about yourself?
Absolutely. It's lovely to be here and talk with you. As you said, my name's Kathy Walsh. I have been working in the pharmaceutical and medical device industries for about 20 years. And I currently am a consultant. I have my own business called Quality Systems now. And we do a lot of work with a range of companies. We work with startups, smaller companies, and all the way up to larger international big companies. We work with groups, teams, and also individuals. And we do a whole range of work, helping with compliance, helping new startups in, again, 13485 accreditation or one of the other ISO accreditations or GMP, get the GMP license. We work with anyone who's got QMS problems or audit issues. So a whole range of different compliance activities that we do.
Excellent. So before we dive into the problems with QMS, maybe you can just give the audience a bit better understanding of what is a QMS, why we need it, is it a regulatory compliance, is it best business practice? What is it about, the QMS?
Absolutely. So QMS stands for Quality Management Systems, it's a management system used particularly in regulated industries that are compliance orientated. So obviously pharmaceuticals and medical devices fit squarely in there. If you're part of the pharmaceutical industry, the regulations have recently changed to call them the pharmaceutical quality system. So they are kind of an interchangeable a term, but I tend to use QMS because it's still quite universal. So it's when we talk about a QMS, it's all of your processes, your systems, your documentation, so your procedures and your records that define how you do business, how you make your product, how you remain compliant. That all goes into, that is part of your quality management system. And it is designed to ensure, particularly in therapeutic industry, to make sure that your product is fit for purpose and that you ensure that you have good patient safety for people using your product.
And why is it such a pain point? Why do you think companies have a dysfunction in QMS, or what's the difference between a dysfunction in QMS and a successful implementation from your perspective, from the different organizations that you had experience with?
Absolutely. So great question. So a well-functioning QMS doesn't necessarily mean that things don't go wrong at times, but it means that it's always improving. You've always got you're moving in a positive direction, and your QMS is becoming mature as your company gets older. So startups quite often will have a QMS that can be a little bit raw, and it hasn't gone through multiple iterations or periodic reviews. And once that company gets a little bit older, that QMS can then become more refined. Now, when you find that a QMS becomes a little dysfunctional, so when things do go wrong, they're not fixed. And so that when that happens over time, then you can have some systems that then begin to fail. They cause knock-on issues in terms of product quality or the way that systems are run. You also notice that if if the QMS is being monitored as it should be, so monthly metrics and trending is being completed, you'll notice when you've got a dysfunctional QMS, assuming they're actually doing their metrics, that you actually start to find that records start to remain open, that the same issue starts cropping up again and again, so root cause is not addressed. And also, obviously, then in an audit, you then see that you've got audit citations are being picked up because of the QMS. So, so I think there's a range of telltale signs that you start to see.
You mentioned that those dysfunctional ones, these are repeating trends of problems that are being ignored. This is a big sign that something is not functioning well. So how do you go back to compliance? You keep monitoring and making sure that you have corrective actions, or what's the best way to get back to being in compliance?
Absolutely. So obviously you need to understand what the root cause of it is. So why have you drifted off compliance? And so that there might be a range of issues. So there might be some systems that are not functioning well, or they're not set up properly, processes that are not, there might be a lot of variability that wasn't originally known about when manufacturing first started, and so it needs to be refined. It can also be a culture. So the culture within the company, particularly top down, if there's not a compliance culture, then the QMS can just be seen as a tick in the box. And by that, I mean, some senior leaders see a QMS as, okay, we've got our documents, then just leave it. We'll go about doing our day-to-day activities. And they don't think about that a QMS is always evolving. It's always being updated. And it's always being improved, and so there's a whole range of things that can pop up, causing the dysfunction. And so to really fix it, you've got to understand what that is. So a lot of companies, what they might do is they'll raise a CAPA, or they'll start an investigation. But if they don't address what that root cause is, then they're probably destined to repeat the issue. And it's really understanding, is this a technical issue? Is it a process issue? Do we have system problems like our software platforms or anything like that? Do we have integration issues between our processes? Or is this a cultural problem in the business and we actually need to do training? Or we need to try and educate our senior leaders in this is what compliance actually means. So there's a range of issues, but you need to start with what's that root cause.
And I want to take you on the point that you brought about that perspective in the company, that culture that says, okay, we are engineers, we need to get the product done, we have serious technological challenges. Here we brought somebody from QA, the QMS is your responsibility, just make sure that we pass the audit and interrupt us the minimum as possible. So this is prevalent, and you see it, of course, as a red sign, yes, as a no-no. I mean,
absolutely.
My criticism is also that I have the feeling that there are two groups that are comfortable with this situation. The engineers are comfortable with the situation, but also I feel that sometimes the QA department are comfortable with that situation, because it makes it very clear that they have a unique job in the company. And if it really was the responsibility of those engineers to integrate the quality management system in their day-to-day, in the way that they approach problems, then the role of QA would have been, I don't want to say it would be less, but it would be much a different role. So where do you see the role of those QA departments, and how do you get to that culture?
So first of all, there's all personnel. So there is the mantra that you hear a lot, particularly in pharmaceuticals, is that quality starts with everyone. And so that difference between what is quality and compliance compared to this is QA and QC, for example. So I think everyone needs to be across the compliance requirements for their role. And obviously that comes with training, and that's driven by what's in the QMS. But then your QA and your QC, so quality assurance and quality control, may be the same department in some places, or they might be split, and then they are headed up like a director of quality. So it could be two departments, but they are seen as the quality function or the quality unit according to the regulations. Now they are actually responsible. They're like essentially the policemen to make sure that what is done on site actually does comply, that the company is continuing to meet changes in regulations, and that they are the ones who are making sure, as from a whole, the QMS is functional, and that changes to one process that an engineer might make is not going to have a knock-on effect to a process that's in the lab or a process that's in the warehouse. So they are looking at overall what's going on in the company from a compliance perspective, which is different to your operations manager, who is looking at, I am manufacturing, I'm getting widgets out the door, my boxes are going out the door, and so they are really, that's their main function, to get that manufacturing going. Now they have a compliance aspect, whereas QA is making sure that the product that does go out the door, they are the checkers, they are the ones who are making sure that the product is fit for purpose.
You've described here a very detailed example about more of a pharmaceutical oriented company. Maybe you can give us that same example when it comes to a medical device company, about those different units, because or do you see it exactly the same?
I tend to think of it's same but different. Medical device companies are different to pharmaceuticals, so you get a much broader range of disciplines in medical devices. So they're not usually massive internationals, though we do have some of those. But usually they're a much smaller company, and so they are much more agile and the way that they function. And so the QA manager in a medical device company is a little bit different to pharmaceuticals, because one, they need to be agile as well, because their product is a little bit different. Technically, it's not just engineering or science or chemistry. Whereas in medical devices, they might need to have a broader understanding. And I tend to find that, because they are a smaller company usually, then the QA department, they may not have QC, they may not need QC in some respects, or QC might be completed by part of the operations area. It's a little bit different. So I do see that there is a difference. I think overall the compliance, how they manage compliance, is similar, but they often are a little bit more flexible in terms of how they get it done rather than what they're doing.
Where do you see the role of software tools, of EQMS coming to play to help organization become more productive or more compliance? I mean, now I can't even imagine what companies not using EQMS, but still, even within EQMS, how do you get it
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot, actually. So particularly smaller startups. So they've got their accreditation, or they've got their 13485 certification, or their product has just been registered, and they've been working with a hard copy QMS, which to start with is actually all they need. But once they get going and they're starting to generate records, and if they're doing the right thing with their QMS, they should be starting to generate quite a lot of records, and it becomes quite laborious. And so then they can either move to a hybrid model, or then they could move to a full EQMS. The things that they need to think about one, understand that it's going to be customary for you. It's going to be specific for you. So you'll have every company has slightly different needs. And so it's so important to do a user requirements analysis or a specification. what are your actual requirements for your systems? Some of the larger platforms that you can get are great for the bigger companies. They are exactly what they need. But for a smaller startup, it's just going to be overkill. The other thing they need to be really careful of is looking at the workflows. So we talked about a little bit earlier, we talked about making sure that your processes were as simple as possible. So sometimes your EQMS can go against that. It can cause you to do loops and loops of approval, for example, where you don't need to. So it's important to look at the workflows of the EQMS and make sure that they are as simple as possible and they are as lean as what you need them to be, but also making sure that they are compliant. So my big takeaway for how do you pick your EQMS is make sure you understand your user requirements before you try.
Maybe one last question on this topic. Where do you see the other systems that are enterprise application that are recording regulatory records, or records that we have to show for in audit, we might need to show in audits, but they are not QMS, like they are not a document management system, they are not complaints management system. So I'm speaking more about like MES, like manufacturing execution system, or LIMS systems for the laboratory. You don't want to, what I'm seeing many times is that you have to export from those systems to a Word document, and then you load out that Word document to the EQMS, and it's kind of
where it forces you to have the same process and integrate a single process all the way through the business. Then there is a massive change to how the business then has to work, because they've got to change completely how they work. Whereas if at the beginning, when they set their QMS up, even as a hard copy system, if they had thought about that integration and how systems work with each other and how processes work with each other, then one, they get a huge amount of efficiency out of it. And two, when they do come to scale up into an EQMS or into a BMS or whatever it is that you're working with, then it's much smoother. So I guess my take-home message there is, if you're thinking about scaling up to those types of systems, you need to expect a massive change in your processes so that they are aligned and they integrate. It actually causes a lot of audit problems. So that's where a lot of compliance issues, they lurk in those interfaces where there's clunky process, where things get forgotten or things aren't well documented, and then when it goes from one silo to another, then it just gets misinterpreted. So yeah, I think that's a big issue for many companies.
How do you recommend, when you go to those companies that offer those enterprise applications, they often also suggest like best practice flows. How much do you suggest to take those suggestions and force your organization to change, to implement those flows? Or
I think that comes back to understanding your user requirements and also then understanding how your current processes work. Because if you can get away with not have to change your workflows into an EQMS that much, then you're going to be able to implement much quickly, much faster. And also there won't be as big a burden on your staff to have to learn a new process as well as a new system. So I think if you're starting out, then it's less of a problem. But if you have an existing QMS and you've got existing processes, then I think it's very important to look at those workflows to make sure that they are at least similar to what you're doing at the moment. And if they're not, then you talk with the vendor and see what can be customized. But yeah, I think some companies shy away from that. They think it's going to be a lot of upfront cost, but they misunderstand that there are so many issues when you've got to change your process just because you're trying to make it fit into an EQMS or an ERP or something like that. And the cost to the business is, it can be several years before the business is actually much more used to these new workflows. So if you think about a SAP process, you have a company moves SAP or SAP, then it often takes them 3 to 5 years to actually understand how that system works for them. Then that lessens that burden.
Thank you for that fascinating insight. Maybe you can tell the listeners how they can follow your publication, or if they have any question, contact you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess the easiest way to follow me is on LinkedIn. So you can check out my profile for Kathy Walsh. You could also check out my company website. So it's www.qualitysystemsnow.com.au. And that's probably the easiest ways to find me. And from there, you can send messages and DMs and those types of things if you need to.
Brilliant. I'll add the link to the description. So thank you
Fabulous.
very much.